Welcome, participants, to the 8th Annual Society of Creation Conference. I'm Gary Locklair, and I'm glad you're here. My presentation today is Positive Creation Evidences. I'm Gary Locklair. I teach computer science at Concordia University in Mequon, Wisconsin. By the way, the last time that I presented, afterwards I heard two of the participants chatting. One said, his presentations are sort of like the horns on a steer. And I'm wondering, where is this going? And he told the other person, yeah, he starts with a good point, he ends with a good point, but there's a lot of bull in the middle. In preparation for this, my wife was trying to calm me down and said, now look, dear, don't try to be too charming. Don't try to be too witty. Don't try to be too intellectual. Just be yourself. Cosmogony is the scientific study of origins. The word cosmology refers to the workings of the origin, and by our evolutionary friends is often used interchangeably. But I prefer the word cosmogony. That deals specifically with origins and the origin of the universe. Have you thought about this? The Bible is carefully designed and crafted to begin with the origin story. It is not coincidence that the very first book, the very first chapter, and the very first verse sets a foundational origin story for us. That was designed. It gives us some meaning and some direction. I want to share with you what I hope will be a practical way that you can discuss origins, creation with other people. And I'd like to submit to you that we present creation in a positive aspect. I'm going to present a number of positive scientific evidences that support the creation model of origins. I want you to listen for these, and in the middle, I'll tell you why I want to present this from a positive sense rather than maybe a negative sense. All right, you've heard that I have 2 points. I begin with a good point. Oh, look, there's a puppy and a kitty. That's so cute. Here's the point I want you to remember. The doctrine of creation, the idea of special creation, is a reasonable idea for origins. Now, some will claim that creation, oh, that's inane, that's ridiculous, that's fantasy, that's foolish. It isn't. Creation is a reasonable explanation for origins, more reasonable than any naturalistic explanation. We know that God created the heavens and the earth. If you share my worldview as a Christian, then we know God created, and we know that because His Word confirms that fact. The Bible declares that creation is a fact. When you read the Bible, the 39 books of the Old Testament from Matthew through Malachi, and the 27 books of the New Testament, hello, where does the Bible begin? The 39 books of the Old Testament from Genesis through Malachi, or the 27 books of the New Testament from Matthew through Revelation, you read time and time and time and time again that God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible declares it, and we accept that. As a matter of fact, it is so reasonable that it is obvious to everyone, as Paul says in his letter to the Romans. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. So if you're a Christian, we know that God created. However, how do we convince the honest skeptic? Now, if you discuss origins and you've been investigating this, I like to think that there are three groups of individuals that we can interact with. First are our hardcore atheistic evolutionary friends. That is a real tough one, and I'm so thankful we have scientists like Russ Humphreys and Spike Passaris to show problems in the evolutionary model. Another group of people, maybe on the far extreme, are the meh, okay, who cares? I don't care anything about that. But there's a large group of people that I want to show you how to reach out to today, and that's what I want to call the honest skeptic. A student came up to me recently and said, "You're a scientist. How can you possibly accept Genesis as science? Science is about what you can observe and test. It's not about faith and not what you accept because what the church tells you to believe." Well, honest skeptic, allow me to present four powerful scientific evidences that support creation. Now, recognize I could bring the biblical text into this, and I will for us. But my honest skeptic friend here, she doesn't necessarily think the Bible is true. So let's use some scientific evidences. Evidence one, I'm going to call this design. Scientifically, it goes by several different names, and in just a moment, I'm going to refer to it as fine tuning. But in general, here is the scientific evidence. Many conditions in the universe are just right. Along with Dr. A.E. Wilder Smith, who first coined this phrase, I call them surprise effects. These surprise effects indicate design, plan, and purpose. In other words, they indicate that the universe was finely tuned by a creator, finely tuned not only for the existence of life, but also for understanding the universe. Oftentimes, I'll refer to this design evidence as the fine tuning evidence, and many other scientists do too. Now, if you're an old person like me, you know exactly what this is. But if you're a younger person, you have no clue. This is a transistor radio. It's sort of like an ancient iPod. It brought music out of thin air. Now, you know how these things work, or maybe you've seen them in a museum. You have a dial, and in the days before digital tuning of channels, you had to turn this analog dial. If you just turn it randomly, you'll no doubt experience a lot of static. As you turn it carefully, you may begin to hear some talk or some music, and then you finely tune it such that the receiver is set exactly to the frequency, and then you can enjoy the music, the speech, or the baseball game, whatever it might be. The parameters of the universe are finely tuned. Let me go through a couple examples. And by the way, there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of this fine-tuned nature of the universe. Consider the Earth and Sun, the distance between these. Spike Passaris is going to share with us the idea of the Goldilocks planet. Planet Earth is just in the right place. It is in what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. The temperature, the energy from the sun, we are in just the right position. If we were in the next planet closer to the sun, Venus, it'd be way too hot. If we were in the next planet further away from the sun, Mars, it'd be way too cold. The distance between the Earth and the sun, one astronomical unit, approximately 93 million miles, is finely tuned for life on the planet. Think about the Earth's atmosphere. The Earth's atmosphere is also finely tuned for life on planet Earth. Our atmosphere is just right. Some other planets have an extremely thin atmosphere. Some planets have an extremely thick atmosphere. Many planets have an atmosphere composed of the wrong stuff. Earth's atmosphere is just right. I say it's designed to do two things. Number one, let in the good radiation, things like heat and light. And number two, to protect us from the bad radiation, the harmful rays that come from the sun. Earth's atmosphere is designed for life. Did you see this news article recently about SpaceX opening up a restaurant on the moon? Yeah, the reviews went like this: great food, but no atmosphere. Consider the rotation of planet Earth, something that God set up on day one of creation. The, the period of Earth's rotation, 24 hours, is again just right for good distribution of solar radiation, heat, and light on planet Earth. If our rotation was slower, then one side would bake while the other side froze. If it was faster, the climate would be all off. Earth's speed of rotation on its axis is finely tuned for life on planet Earth. Have you thought about the moon? The moon's existence is absolutely crucial for life on planet Earth. Yes, the moon is pretty. Yes, it is the ruler of the night as a light reflector of the sun. But it does much more than that. One of the things the moon does is it controls the tides. If you're a fisher folk, you know about this. Twice a day, the tides. Now, if the moon were a little bigger or a little smaller, a little closer or a little further away, the tides would not be just right. The tides are important for doing such things as cleansing the tidal basins and cleansing the shorelines of the planet. Without that cleansing, we wouldn't have algae and other organisms that can generate oxygen. Without oxygen, no life on planet Earth. The moon isn't just a pretty object. The moon is absolutely essential for life on planet Earth. In one of my science classes, I always like to start off with pretty easy questions, throw the softball. So at the beginning of class, I asked, which is further away, class, Florida or the moon? One of my students said, duh, can you see Florida from here? I know I'm not the only one laughing at these. Think about water. Water covers 71% of the surface area of planet Earth. The deepest ocean trench is deeper than the tallest mountain. There's an enormous amount of water on planet Earth. Water has a number of unique characteristics. One of the characteristics of water that's absolutely vital for life is this. As the temperature decreases, as water goes through a phase change from liquid to solid, its density decreases. What is that physical chemist trying to tell me? Ice floats. When water freezes, ice floats. That is different than any other compound in normal temperature and pressure on planet Earth. Every other compound, when it freezes, its density increases and it sinks. Now, why is this important for life? Because if water didn't have this characteristic, in the winter, ice wouldn't be on top of the lakes and rivers. It would sink to the bottom. And then in summer, the radiant energy couldn't go through all the layers of water to warm up and melt the ice. Thankfully, I live in Wisconsin. It gets really cold here. Thankfully, ice floats. So in the summertime, the ice melts and the temperature is regulated. If water didn't have that characteristic, lakes would freeze solid, rivers would freeze solid. We wouldn't have life as we know it on planet Earth. By the way, I mentioned I am a computer scientist, and somebody asked me, so what are your hobbies? Well, one of the things I've been doing recently is I've been watching running water online. Yeah, it's a live stream. Solar eclipses. These are magnificent events. My wife and I were privileged, I believe this was 3 years ago in 2017, when there was a total solar eclipse across much of the United States. My wife and I went to northern Kentucky to view this. If you've ever seen a solar eclipse, these are magnificent events. Now, that's interesting. How does that work? Well, you say, that's easy. The moon passes in front of the sun. But the sun is huge. The sun is 400 times bigger than the moon. Well, guess what? The moon is 400 times closer than the sun. So when the moon passes in front of the sun, there's a total solar eclipse. That is by design. It's not just an accident. My colleague, Dr. Danny Faulkner, has taken all the data of all the planets in our solar system with their moons and has calculated, could you see a total solar eclipse on any other planet in the solar system? In other words, is this relationship just right? And the answer is no. Only on planet Earth. Our sun is unique. I know you've heard people say this. Our sun, our star, is just an ordinary star, just like, don't you believe it for a second. Our sun is unique and uniquely designed. My colleague, Dr. Ron Samick, an astronomer, shared with me that the galactic survey that's going on is attempting to identify other sun-like stars in our galaxy. And so far, after surveying several million stars, we've only found 2 that come relatively close, but not quite at all. Here's just one characteristic of our unique star, the sun. The spectra, the light that comes from our sun, is finely tuned to photosynthesis. Now, gardeners, you know this. You try to grow plants indoors with a 100-watt incandescent bulb, if you can still even get those. It doesn't work at all. But you have a plant outside, it flourishes. Why? Because photosynthetic processes are tuned to the exact spectra that the sun produces. Gardeners, those are the so-called full spectra lamps. And there are many other unique characteristics. Our star, the sun, is uniquely designed. By the way, my university debated, they wanted to give the sun an honorary degree. I said, that's silly. The sun already has millions of degrees. Well, folks, this can go on, but then so would my jokes. So what I want to tell you is there are hundreds of these fine-tuning parameters that hold our solar system together and allow for life and intelligence to investigate it. Consider the gravitational constant, the properties of oxygen, the size of the proton, the charge of the electron, and the list goes on. Naturalists, materialists, my evolutionary colleagues attempt to deny this evidence. It is so strong and so obvious, everybody recognizes it, but they got to come up with ways to say, nah, this isn't design. Here's a really old article, May 21st, 2020, where the author says, God didn't fine-tune the universe. We did. What? How did we do it? Well, the conclusion is this. The reason that the universe is fine-tuned is because we're here. If it weren't fine-tuned, we wouldn't be here. Okay? I'd like to deal in the realm of science. God did fine-tune our universe. So scientifically, what's the interpretation of this first evidence? What do I share with my honest skeptic after listing a number of these fine-tuning evidences? Here's my interpretation. The grand omnipotent designer, that's just an acronym for God, precisely crafted the universe. Let me share a couple verses that indicate that with you. This is Isaiah 40. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? That sounds like design. Or consider Job 28. For he looks at the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave to the wind its weight and apportioned the waters by measure. That sounds like design. In other words, all these fine-tuning things are not coincidences. NCIS fans, you know Special Agent Leroy Jethro Gibbs, who will always say, there are no coincidences. There are just too many coincidences for it to be coincidence. This is designed precisely and crafted for us. The universe is not an accident. Now, what's going to help my honest skeptic here? I want you to think about this when you're discussing with other people. Why is it important to frame our discussion in a positive sense? Well, imagine that I'm talking baseball with my good friend, Dr. Joel Heck. Dr. Heck is a Dodgers fan. I'm a Giant fan. Dr. Heck is going to try to convince me that the Dodgers are a better baseball team than the Giants. When he begins talking, I immediately say, the Dodger players are all dope addicts. The Dodger manager is an insane idiot. The owner is a moron, and the fans are murderous thieves. Certainly, that's a good way to win friends and influence people, right? To be positive when we're sharing these to the honest skeptic is disarming. It's winsome. We can take some direction from the philosopher, the 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal, mathematician, scientist, theologian, philosopher. Pascal put it this way: discuss, don't argue. Share, don't shout. If you want to get your point across, you can shout, you can yell and scream, but many people will turn you off if you do that, even if what you're saying is true. So how do we present these evidences? Personally, I'll always ask the other person what they think, listen attentively, and then I'll ask them, may I share with you some reasons why I believe God created the heavens and the earth? And when they say yes, I'll say, great, I just happen to have a few right here. Evidence 2, conservation. Scientists, there are several different natural laws that deal with conservation. The laws of conservation say that the amount of mass and energy in the universe is constant. In other words, you can neither create nor destroy mass or energy today in the universe. We can convert mass to energy, and you can convert energy to matter, but you can't make new mass or new energy today in the universe. That's the law of conservation. Now, what does this have to do with origins, the origin of the universe, and how does it relate to creation? Well, let me share this interesting story with you. I have a magic bottle. This is a magic bottle. By the way, at one time I also had a magic lamp. I was out in the woods one day and I tripped over this object. I picked it up and rubbed it, and out popped a genie. It wasn't what I expected, because the genie said, "I'm a genie, but I can only grant you one wish." And I said, "Oh, great. I wish I was rich." And the genie said, "Done. Have a nice day, rich." Well, this is my magic bottle. What I've done with this bottle, as you can tell, is I put a stopper in it and I set it on my mantle. And every day I came in to look at this bottle, it was empty. It was empty. It was empty. One day I came into the room and there was a ship inside that bottle. What do I conclude? This is a magic bottle. This bottle birthed that ship. Now you're saying, that's ridiculous, mister. It didn't happen that way. In a closed system, matter couldn't have been created in there. You're right. Someone from outside of the bottle must have injected that matter into that system. That's a reasonable explanation. So, consider this bottle to be the universe. Where did the matter and energy of the universe come from? Science says it had to come from something outside. The universe must have been created by an omnipotent, transcendent, that is, outside of the universe, powerful, intelligent. The universe could not have begun itself. That's foolish. The universe was created by an outside intelligence. That's reasonable. Consider what God said about this at the end of the creation account in Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Or consider Hebrews 4:4. For somewhere he's spoken of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all of his work. Here's how I think about creation. I think about creation as an apologetic. We don't do creation to prove God's existence. We can't do that, by the way. We don't use creation to prove the truthfulness of the Bible. We can't do that either, by the way. Creation is an apologetic. Science can't prove things. Let me come back to that, because that's a startling statement. What we're doing in creation is we're giving answers. We're giving reasons for the idea. This is exactly what Peter commanded us in 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. The word that the ESV translation renders defense is the Greek word apologia. Apologetic means answer. We need to answer the honest skeptic, and we do so with gentleness and respect. What's the third evidence to show that God created the heavens in the beginning? My third evidence is the idea of decay. Something that's very familiar to, I'm sure, all of us, decay. As a matter of fact, there are a few natural laws that talk about decay, such as the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy is a mathematical model, mathematical measure of energy, is naturally, strike that from the record, Your Honor. Entropy is a measure of disorder in a system. The second law says that entropy is increasing. Naturally, things decrease. Thermodynamics is a science of work, heat, and work. And so what this is saying is that the capacity to do work decreases over time. I think we're familiar with this, that naturally things wear out and run down. The natural law says that everything moves from a state of order to disorder. Did you catch the key word there? Naturally, things move from order to disorder. For example, consider my little wind-up robot. Before I showed him to you, my robot looks a little sad and red around the eyes because just before this presentation, he was crying. And I asked my robot, why are you crying? And he said, I want my mama and data. Well, you know what's going to happen when I wind up my robot, right? You give your robot 3 turns, you set it down, and it walks forever. And that's why today, all over planet Earth, every robot that's ever been wound up is still walking all over the planet. You can't even get anywhere today because there's all these. No, of course not. You wind up that robot, it walks for a little bit, and then entropy takes over, and then eventually, sooner rather than later, it stops. If I wind up this robot, it will eventually wind down and stop walking. How does this help us? What's the interpretation? This is saying that because naturally things wind down, in the beginning they must have been supernaturally wound up. Initially at the beginning, everything must have been supernaturally wound up, since now we see things naturally winding down over time. Scriptural reference for this, consider Psalm 102. Of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will change them like a robe, and they will pass away. But you are the same, and your years have no end. Or consider Paul writing in Romans 8. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. If naturally we see things winding down, how could the same natural processes have wound up the earth in the beginning? How could they have wound up the universe in the beginning? Now that's foolish. Much more reasonable to say a designer wound things up. I do not want to steal Spike's thunder. I really stole these ideas from him, but he stole them from Scripture, so I can probably talk about them. But in this context, have you thought about the purpose of the heavens? The heavens, first of all, serve as signs and seasons. The heavens also have a purpose of sustaining life. The heavens absolutely declare God's glory, something everyone sees and understands, and we can easily share with our honest skeptic friend. Now, I believe this is kind of important to understand because many skeptics are influenced by natural materialists and they don't even see what's happening here. Don't confuse natural material with natural origins. Don't confuse natural material with natural origins. Just because it's made out of something that's natural does not mean that nature formed it. The object that you see here, this little grizzly bear, was a gift from my sainted mother a number of years ago. In 1980, we lived in Oregon. Some of you know that in 1980, Mount St. Helens, a volcanic mountain in southern Washington, catastrophically exploded. And this object is made from the volcanic ash of Mount St. Helens. As a physical chemist, if I took this into the laboratory, I can put it in the mass spec and I could tell you this is all natural material. Is it reasonable to assume that it had a natural origin? No. What's reasonable to assume is there was an intelligent artisan who carefully crafted that natural material into a thing of beauty. Created by intelligence? Reasonable. Developed natural? That's foolish. Related to this idea, I'll caution you, please don't look for natural explanations to supernatural events. Don't look for natural explanations to supernatural events. Can I give you one example? Consider the Star of Bethlehem. Many people, many smart people over the years have tried to uncover a natural explanation for the Star of Bethlehem. Perhaps it was a comet, perhaps it was an asteroid, perhaps it was a conjunction of planets, perhaps it was a special planet in a strange location to the Eastern sages. The Star of Bethlehem was a supernatural creation of God. You can read about it in Matthew. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. It went before them, it went up and down, it disappeared and appeared, and it rested over the place where Jesus was. Don't look for natural explanations for supernatural events. God is a supernatural event. While I have a number of evidences that I believe I can share with an honest skeptic about why God created the heavens, why creation is a more reasonable explanation for origins, let me just share one more with you because this is such a common question. It would be good to have some things, at least to convince yourself that the universe is young. Now, creationary scientists, you know this, we always talk about a young age. When you stop and think about it, that's kind of funny, isn't it? I mean, seriously, my students would say a 64-year-old professor is old. So if you're talking about a universe that's 6,000 years old, that's really old. Of course, I told my class, now that I'm this old, everything clicks. My knee clicks, my elbow clicks, my neck clicks. You know this as the pioneering work of Dr. Thomas Barnes and the modern work of Dr. Russell Humphreys. Science shows us a couple things. First of all, the Earth has a magnetic field. And secondly, that magnetic field is decaying and decaying rapidly. By the way, this has nothing to do with the reversal of the polarity. What we're talking about is the strength of the dipole moment, the total energy. We have measured it for 200 years. We have measured it fairly precisely for 100 years. And we see that it is decaying exponentially. How does this show us that the Earth is young? If you extrapolate and go back in time, you will discover that the Earth could not be more than a few 10,000 years old. Otherwise, the magnetic field would be too strong to support life on planet Earth. The decay of the Earth's magnetic field fits perfectly and reasonably with a planet in a universe created less than 10,000 years ago. You may have heard of this. Spike Pizarros has talked about this. And we've known this too. Scientists have speculated, and now we have good observational evidence that the moon is receding from the Earth. Now, it isn't doing so quickly. It's about an inch per year. So over a few thousand years, that's not much at all. So the receding moon is perfectly consistent and reasonable for a young age of the universe. But if you want to think of the universe as being vastly old, if you want to think of the solar system as being 4.5 billion years old, you've got a problem. Because if we extrapolate even a few hundreds of millions of years, the moon's orbit is too close to the Earth, it would crash into the Earth. If you go back about 1 billion years, the moon is rolling on the surface of the Earth. No, that doesn't work at all. The recession of the moon is a clear evidence for a young age of our solar system. What about the rings of planets? 4 rings in our solar system, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, have rings. And the most prominent of those are Saturn's rings, and they are beautiful, especially when seen in false color images like this. We have discovered something about Saturn's rings. They are very unstable. Most secular scientists would say that Saturn's rings could not appear the way they do today and be much more than a few tens of thousands of years old. If they were older, first of all, they'd be darker, and secondly, ultimately, they would disperse. Now, there's no problem with these beautiful rings on Saturn in a solar system that's less than 10,000 years old. On the other hand, if you believe that the solar system is 4.5 billion years old, then you've got a real problem. Because the Saturn's rings formed at the same time as Saturn, they wouldn't be here. If they tried to form later, how is that happening? That is the asteroids of the gap syndrome. Saturn's rings point powerfully to a young age of our solar system. Comets. Yes, I know that this really can't be a comet since it's circling planet Earth and not the sun, but it's a cool picture. Comets, as you know, are dirty snowballs that circle the sun, little tiny bits of rock and ice, etc. And for most of their travels, they are dark, we don't see them, but when they get near the sun, they have these sometimes beautiful tail. We've classified comets in various ways. One of the more famous classifications are the so-called short period comets. A comet you're familiar with, Halley's Comet, is a short period comet. You know, at one time when I was a little boy, we called it Halley's Comet. And the British Scientific Association said, no, it's called Halley's. And then the Halley family said, we say Halley, so I don't know what to call it. But Halley's Comet is a short period comet. Once every 76 years, it comes back on its journey around the sun. Now, there's a problem with short period comets. Every time they get close to the sun and glow, they're actually burning off some of their material. So every revolution around the sun, they're losing some mass. You can see what's going to happen. After a while, they will disintegrate. They'll go away. So, well, everyone agrees that the longest that any short period comet could last is 10,000 years. Of course, that's no problem in a solar system that's 10,000 years or less old. Huge problem for a solar system that is greater than 10,000 years. Short period comets also show us that the solar system is young. For most of these evidences, I've been attempting to present them in a positive light. It's helpful to always go back and show the alternative, though, just so there's no confusion. This last one, let me point it in a negative sense because it's not a creationary idea, it's an evolutionary idea. And that's the idea of the faint young sun paradox. What's this? Well, remember, in the evolutionary model, our solar system is 4.5 billion years old. What evolutionary scientists have said is that at the beginning of our solar system, when the sun was forming, during its early stages, it would have been fainter, not as powerful. As a matter of fact, most estimates, evolutionary estimates, say that the young sun would have been 25% of the energy output of the current sun. So the sun was a little dimmer. So what? Well, here's the problem in the evolutionary model. The sun would not have enough energy to spark life on planet Earth. If there were water on planet Earth, it would be frozen solid. Chemical evolution could not have occurred. It could not have occurred anyway, but it certainly couldn't have occurred under those circumstances. So this is why evolutionary scientists call this a paradox. One part of our model says the sun had to be faint. Another part of our model says life had to develop on planet Earth at that time. And the two don't go together very well. If true, the early Earth would be frozen, no life, and we've got a conundrum. There are a number of limitations of science. Operation science, the science with women and men in white lab coats, the physicists, the chemists, the astronomers, the etc. Operation science only works in the present, in the here and now. And it only deals with phenomena we can observe and test. So deals with the present, deals with phenomenon that we can observe and test. Great stuff. But what do we do about the past? If you're not a scientist, you may not realize this. Science cannot prove anything. Science doesn't prove things. Science can disprove things. That's its major function. Science can disprove ideas and models and theories, but science cannot prove things. Science is tentative. New knowledge could come along and displace old. Science can be used to support an idea, just as I've done, giving you positive scientific evidences for creation. But science cannot verify the truthfulness of an idea. Philosophical arguments can prove things. Philosophy is the science of argumentation. Mathematics can prove things. But science can't prove things. You need to understand that because oftentimes people will come to me and say, you don't have any arguments for creation. All you do is argue against evolution. You know what? That's good science. I am so thankful for scientists like Russ Humphreys and Spike Pissaris, who can argue scientifically against evolutionary models. That's exactly the purpose of science. When we show that that model is wrong and implausible and unreasonable, then a good scientist abandons that model and looks for a better idea. So attacks against evolution are a great use of science, but for our honest skeptic, for an everyday person like you and me, probably showing the positive aspects of creation is a better use of our time than the negative aspects of evolution. So, for origins, for things that happened in the past, what we do is we construct models. Cosmogony, the scientific study of origins, there are only models. We can find supporting evidences, but like in all science, we can't prove anything. We uncover these supporting evidences, and then what we do is build a strong model. Just like in a court of law, there are two sides, two attorneys, the defense and the prosecution. They're each building a case with supporting evidence. Now it's up to the jury to answer which one made a better case. So it's up to us to present the evidence in hopefully a positive and winsome way to at least give our honest skeptics some food for thought. All right, let's have a little test here and see if we can put this all together. I do like to hike and investigate the rocks in my current state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has some very interesting geology. You know, not too long ago, I found this cell phone encased in this rock. You can see I had to cut it away a little bit to get at it. That's a fact. Now, here's the question. What's the origin of that cell phone? Which of these explanations makes more sense? The rock naturally formed that cell phone over eons of time with cosmic bombardment. That seems foolish to me. Or the cell phone was created by an intelligent human being and then a clumsy human being like me lost it hiking in the woods. That seems reasonable. Now notice you have not seen the origin of that cell phone. You didn't see anyone created or anything created. In spite of that, you can determine that one explanation, intelligence, is reasonable, and the other explanation, nature, is not. So I told you that there's a good point at the beginning. Creation is reasonable. If you remember nothing else about this presentation, there are two things I want you to remember. First of all, the doctrine of creation, the idea of scientific special creation, is reasonable. It's a more reasonable explanation than natural ones like evolution. There's a great verse in Paul's letter to the Philippians. It's Philippians 4, verse 5. And the ESV version renders the Greek word well. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Creation is reasonable. My wife always tells me, don't give these presentations with all this highfalutin stuff. Give people something practical. So here's my practical tip for you. Here's my hot tip. This is my wife. We live on a 5-acre hobby farm. We have 2 horses that were rescued from an abusive situation. My wife is an equine scientist. My wife has our horses so well trained that all she has to do is wag her finger in certain ways and they'll do what she wants them to do. My wife is not a nuclear physicist. She's not an astronomer. She's not a biochemist. But when someone wants to talk about creation with her, she'll share with them design characteristic of the horse's hoof. She can easily rattle off a dozen characteristics of the horse's hoof that scream intelligent design. So what's the hot tip? Pick something that interests you. So much in God's creation we could investigate. Learn it, understand it, and be able to share it. That's all the honest skeptic is looking for. So here's my second point, the one I want you to remember. What's the purpose of creation? Well, preliminarily, creation is two things. First of all, creation is a billboard pointing to something. Creation pointing to a creator. Creation should be used as a mirror to reflect the creator. And Christ is the creator. So why discuss creation at all? Why bring that up? Why use it at all? What's the whole point of the doctrine of creation? Why share it? Why investigate it? Why be concerned at all? Here's why. Here's my second point. Use creation to point to Christ. The only legitimate purpose of creation and its investigation is as a billboard and a mirror to point people to Christ. This is what Paul said in Colossians. For by him, that's Christ, all things were created. All things were created through him and for him and by him. Folks, I have conveniently, and I did this on purpose, have not left any time for questions. I apologize for not doing that. I'm a little behind schedule. So I don't want to cut into Spike's next presentation too much. But I do want to thank you all for being such an attentive audience. As a matter of fact, oftentimes my students fall asleep, and I didn't see anybody out there falling asleep. And I thank you for your rapt attention.